Hello and welcome to Leaders Up Close. This is part of our program here at UCF in the Engineering Leadership and Innovation Institute. And so we bring leaders in here to share their perspective on leadership. I'm Tim Kottner and I'm the director of that institute. It's my pleasure and real honor today to introduce Vinod Philip from Siemens. He's going to share a perspective on leadership that is a very personal perspective about what we need to think about and what we need to become, maybe not just as leaders, but maybe as humans. So the journey's going to be a little bit different today, but a really cool journey, a real cool story. So please help me welcome Vinod Philip.
Thank you. All right, thank you for the introduction, Tim. So what I want to talk about today is I'm going to try something for the first time for myself. I'm going to use one slide, which is, in corporate speak, an impossible task. There's a joke at Siemens. We sometimes think we're building PowerPoints rather than power plants. So I'm going to try to break that model and work off one slide. So what Tim said was quite important, because in my perception and in my view as a leader, leadership is a very human privilege. And you don't become a leader. Others accept you as their leader. So leadership is really about a set of behaviors, a set of actions that you personify that others would then accept and decide to make you their leader. So what I talk about today is starting from, there is a lot of literature out there that talks about leadership, and leadership has got this certain buzzword or glamour around it, and I think it's a lot simpler than that. And when people talk about leadership, they always talk from the perspective of looking outwards. But in my opinion, you cannot become a leader without having self-leadership first. You have to be able to lead yourself through life before you have the privilege and the honor of leading others through life. So what I'll talk about today is something that I call the 360 model, and it's going to be a very introspective model, because that's where it starts from. I'm going to walk you through 10 different domains of how I see myself as a leader managing my life. And as I walk through these domains in my life, I would develop the identity that then others would accept me as their leader. So the intent of today is, and it will be abstract, but please feel free to stop and ask questions while I'm walking through it. The intent is for me to share with you how I see my life and my leadership paradigm, my leadership framework, and then for you to take what you want from that and create something that's very personal to yourself if you want to be a leader. And what leaders basically do is that they carry out a series of acts of leadership. And an act of leadership is defined as anything you do in the course of your day across all the domains of your life that add value, structure, or meaning to a situation. You walk into a situation, you assess the situation, you identify if there is an opportunity that exists in that situation, you assess if there is a threat that exists in that situation, or an obligation. And once you figure out what the situation holds, then you have to think about, okay, what is the act I can demonstrate or produce in this situation that either adds value. Value could be an example of having some prior experience, coming into a meeting, coming into a situation and saying, okay, based on my expertise, I think you should do this, or I think we should do this. You're adding value. In the other case, you might be coming into situations where you have no prior expertise, but you can still demonstrate leadership by adding structure. And a simple act of structure could be, hey guys, why are we here in terms of how do we bring some clarity into this? if there's a decision-making process. What are the options? Lay out the options, pros and cons, lay it on a paper, and let's make a decision. That's adding structure without knowing the content. That's an act of leadership. The last thing is an act that adds meaning. And this is something that I see is probably the easiest way to bring leadership identity into any discussion. In corporations like Siemens, you have a lot of different meetings. People come into meetings, and they sit and they talk. And they keep talking. And they have analysis. And they keep analyzing. But nothing gets done. So a simple act of leadership there could be, guys, why are we here? What is the purpose of our meeting? What do we want to leave this meeting with? That question, even though you don't have the answer, asking that question is an example of adding meaning to a situation. So, to summarize, leadership is nothing but a series of acts, and these are acts that add value, structure, or meaning, and you can do this all day, every day, and you're demonstrating leadership. In my mind, there's nothing more fancy than that. It's that basic. Now, the reason I gave you that preface was when I talked through these domains of mine, in each domain, you have to demonstrate these acts of leadership, and starting with self-leadership, making sure you ask yourself, what is the meaning of this domain to me? What is the structure with which I will manage this domain? And what is the value of this domain to me? Okay? So that's the basic context. And now I'm going to walk through them. The first is body. All source of our individual power comes from our body. I've seen so many cases where there are a lot of people who want to achieve leadership, and they burn themselves out. They destroy themselves physically. They have all sorts of terminal illnesses, and they are done. Without your body, without the power, your physical power of your body, you got nothing. So the first domain that's very important for me is to take care of my body through my diet, through exercising as much as I can, and making sure that I look after my fundamental source of power. The second domain is family. I have a wife, I have 2 kids, and I have obligations to them. Anything I do has to be in congruence with the values and priorities of my family. If I lose the support of my wife, or if I lose my children, then everything I do as a human leader is worthless. So the domain of family is very important. For me, that's how I define my family. For each of you, depending on your state in life, you can define the family the way you want to define it. But it's important to have that as a fundamental source of power that will guide and drive and support your leadership. The third domain is play. You have got to be able to identify certain time in your life where you have some hobbies, where you are a beginner, where you are learning. That keeps you humble. And it's also a way for you to distract yourself from the burden of day-to-day life. So you got to find something and a certain amount of time in moderation to be able to enjoy yourself. Then we talk about sociability. This is really important. This is your social network. And I don't mean this on a very superficial level. I mean this as a network of help that you develop with people around you who enable you to make the full use of your time. As humans, we are all very finite. We cannot be everywhere all the time. But if we have a strong network of friends and supporters and helpers, and they are helping us because they know that we will help them, so that's a relationship based on sincerity, then you can multiply your effect. You can be in more than one place at one time because you have other people working for you, supporting you, and this network is very important. This is what, in very superficial terms, people call networking. And what do you see in networking? People go for dinners, they all have some very light conversations, they exchange business cards, and they believe they have actually formed a network. Nothing could be further from the truth. You form a network with a very finite number of people, 15, 20 people max, and you form deep relationships with them. Relationships based on trust and help. That's a network. And that's what this domain, for me, means. The next is education. And this is something also I find very interesting. If I take the analogy of sports now, and let me just pick one sport. Let me pick football. And I look at somebody like, say, Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning as an individual is super talented. He has got all the gifts to be an athlete. But what he does is that he constantly and continuously builds on that fundamental talent he's got by practicing, training, and educating. So if somebody like Peyton Manning works every day to get better by educating himself in the art and skill and science of football, think about how much time we as leaders spend educating ourselves on the skill of leadership. It amazes me when I look around, I find all these people around me who have titles like director of this and director of that. And I ask them, when was the last time you actually went and studied leadership? When was the last time you went and sat down with and became a student again, a student of the game of leadership? And the shocking answer is, it's a very, very small minority of leaders who educate themselves. Education keeps you humble. It keeps you grounded. What I've realized is that the more I read, the less I realize I know. The world of not knowing just gets bigger and bigger, and that keeps me humble. So education is absolutely important. Career. Unfortunately, people jump right into this career perspective without really understanding what is a career. A career is a 40-year journey. You start in your early 20s, and you go on until your early 60s. So 40 years of holding a variety of jobs, a variety of positions, a variety of responsibilities. So you have to think about this in the long run. It's not a one-stop shop to say, okay, I got promoted once, and that means I'll get promoted indefinitely, and my career will automatically, magically come together. It takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of thinking, and it's a domain that you have to identify as a distinct domain that you have to work for. You will need to have the education, you will need to have the network, you will need to have the physical capabilities, you will need to have your family with you over the course of your 40 years to support you. So these are all very integrated. But people sometimes tend to jump into career as the only focus for them when they talk about leadership. And that's very dangerous because it's unsustainable. The world. More and more today, leadership positions are global. I have responsibility for employees in 12 different locations in 6 different countries. If they give me the authority or the privilege to be their leader, it is my job to learn about the world around us so that I'm able to assess threats, opportunities, and obligations that are coming up all the time in different parts of the world. So we have to get good, or at least reasonably competent, at reading the world. That's a whole domain that is becoming so important in today's modern global marketplace. I've seen so many instances of people calling themselves leaders, never having left a state of the US and thinking that they can run a global business. It's not possible. You've got to make it part of your domain of improvement, of understanding the world. Dignity. This is where a lot of people break down. Dignity is, simply put, the behaviors you demonstrate where your actions are in congruence or are in line with your values. So, therefore, you need to know what your values are. What are the things that you stand for and live for? And once you have those, and don't make a laundry list, make a short list of 3 or 4 fundamental values that are important to you and that guide your actions. Because the more your actions are in line with these values, the greater your sense of dignity. And the greater your sense of dignity, the greater you come across as somebody who is in control or centered. People see, they sense, we sense stress, we sense nervousness, we sense insecurities in leaders. And the reason why those senses exist in the leaders is because they have lost, or they don't have a sense of dignity because their actions are not fundamentally aligned with their values. So this becomes a very important domain that I find myself constantly working on, asking myself what my values are. Let me pause here for a second. As I'm talking through this, I want to make it very clear to you that I am also on this journey myself. And I break this journey up into 4 different phases. A novice, so a real beginner who doesn't know what he doesn't know. So that is, I'm unconsciously incompetent, okay? The second phase is that I'm gaining some skill. So that's the phase that I call conscious incompetence, where I know I'm screwing up, but at least I know I'm screwing up now. That's the second phase. The third phase is where you start gaining some mastery. That's conscious competence, where you work at it, you get good at it, but you really have to pay attention to be good at it. It's like when you learn to ride a bicycle. It's that phase where you're on the bicycle, you're on the road, you're staying vertical, but you really got to pay attention, otherwise you lose your balance. That's the phase of conscious competence. And the last phase is unconscious competence, where you can ride a bike, have a drink, talk on the phone, text, whatever you guys want to do. You guys are doing it unconsciously. That's mastery. So even in the leadership journey, I consider people as my role models who are masters, folks like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. So these are the guys who I consider unconsciously competent in the acts of leadership. So when I put that as my calibration scale, I'll be the first to admit I'm in the state of conscious incompetence, borderline conscious competence. So I'm not speaking from a pedestal saying that I know all this. Every day I have good days and bad days. Some days I mess all this up. Other days I manage to get by keeping them somehow in control, but it's a journey. So that's where I am at. So I'm not speaking down to you, I'm speaking at you from my experience base. Spirituality, and I mean this very distinctly as being in harmony with yourself and working towards something bigger. It could be religious, it doesn't have to be religious. You just got to be a spiritual person. But it's important because that's where you go back into yourself and try to find yourself again. Because remember, leadership of others can only start, genuine, authentic leadership of others can only start with leadership of yourself. So this is something that's relevant for me. And last but not least, the domain of money. Now, when I talk about money, I talk about it much broader. I define money as one's ability to transact for help. Currency is just a small portion of money. If I have an identity, if I have a certain identity of leadership and people accept me as their leader or make me their leader, I have money because I can get them to help me, and I don't have to exchange currency. I don't have to give them currency. So when I talk about money over here, it's a domain of an identity where you build yourself up to the point where people want to help you and you don't have to pay them, or you help others and they don't have to pay you. So it's beyond currency. But this domain of money is important because you need to know that to get by in life, to motivate others, you will need money. And you have to learn to manage money. You have to learn to respect money. And you have to understand that people who work for you when you are in a leadership role, they're working for money, they're looking to take care of their concerns, their families. So you have to understand this. It's not very superficial. It's a very deep assessment of the ability to transact for help. So I want to stop soon because I'd like to have a dialogue with all of you. So when I talk about leadership, it is very personal. And what I have observed is that the more I focus on developing myself and filling my day with activities and actions that integrate these domains, the better I become and the more leadership authority others give me. And I'm not aspiring to lead others. I aspire to lead myself. And in that process, people have asked me to lead them. And I find that fascinatingly interesting. And so what I'm doing right now over here is also an act to integrate my sense of education, because in order for me to come and talk to you about this, I had to educate myself on what I'm going to talk about. But by talking to you all, I'm also addressing my domain of sociability, of being a member of something bigger. I'm also strengthening my relationship with friends like Tim and others at UCF who are part of my network. I'm also talking about the world. I'm also talking about dignity, because this is in line with my values. So this is an example of filling my day with things that integrate more than one domain, because it's not humanly possible in 24 hours of a day to come up with distinct activities that only hit one domain at a time. So the more I can find activities that integrate different domains, I can get more out of my day. So to summarize, leadership is not a God-given gift. It is not a natural ability that helps, but leadership is fundamentally a skill that you have to practice consciously and understand that you don't become a leader. Others make you their leader. So start the journey from looking at yourself and improve yourself, and then it'll be interesting to see how others start accepting you or asking you to be their leader. So with that, I'm done, and we have half an hour for questions.
So Vinod, the one thing I get, because I'm the professor, I get asked the first few questions.
All right, sounds good.
So as you've lived your life, have you ever maybe been out of kilter?
Every day.
So when you are out of kilter and something goes, how do you respond to get back in balance?
It's a great question, because there was one domain I didn't put on this because I wasn't sure how it's going to go over. I think this is heavy enough stuff, right? So I didn't want to overdo it. But there is something called the domain of an emotional state, right? So, from an engineering perspective, every system likes to be in a state of equilibrium, or at least tries to get to the state of equilibrium. But at the same time, things change and you get knocked off equilibrium. And the stable systems are stable because they regain their state of equilibrium. Unstable systems lose it. So what I've observed between the real top performers and the average performers is not that the top performers don't get off kilter. But what they do is they get back on track really fast. And they train themselves to realize and recognize through self-awareness that their mood is off, or that they have been disrupted. They lose their patience, or they lose their cool, or they get overexcited. But they also have the self-correction mechanism through self-awareness to recognize, oh, I'm kind of going the wrong way. Let me come back on track. So it's so I keep working on it. I mean, there are times, and Jerry can attest for this. There are some meetings where I lose my cool. I know I'm losing my cool, and I keep losing it. Yeah. And then what happens? I'm like, man, I screwed up again. And usually I call the person that I was rude to afterwards and say, I'm human. I screwed up. I'm sorry. I'll try better next time. But there are other points in time where one of these domains goes out of control, and then I realize, oh, hold on, slow down, let's get back on track. So it's really a question of self-awareness and accepting that your emotional state is something that you have to always be aware of. Right now, when I first started talking, I felt nervous. It's a normal reaction for anybody to speak, to feel nervous, right? But you have to accept that you're going to be nervous, deal with it, and get back on track. So it's more a question of finding equilibrium again when you're off kilter versus just letting go more and more.
So these folks are going to be starting a job either in 6 months, a year, 2 years. Do you see new hires maybe all do something really well here that they should do, or they come in and they really get out of kilter? So maybe just a little advice to make sure as they kind of walk into your world and work for you.
I think the things that all of you will bring to the table when you join a company at first is your education. That's the first thing you have to offer, right? You have to offer your education. So the educational skill set, the domain of education is usually pretty strong for a fresh graduate because you have spent 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, depending on a bachelor's, master's, a PhD of educating yourself. That domain is very strong. And also another domain that is becoming increasingly obvious to me as new employees come into the workforce is the domain of world and sociability. All of you have a different perspective of the world and different perspectives of how humans interact that is much more current, much more up to date than what many senior managers in the companies have in their minds. Because many of them studied and grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and they may not always be in tune with the world marketplace. So all of you bring a strong domain of the world awareness and the sociability aspect of how to deal with the new marketplace, how to use tools like social media or computers or computational methods, a lot of things that you might take for granted. Many managers and leaders are out of date. So I would say these are the 3 domains that I see usually people coming in with. The others come over time. Most of you are lucky that you're all healthy enough to have a lot of energy. That's great. Domain of body is in good shape in that sense. Family, spirituality, that depends on the person.
Okay. Questions for Vinod?
Yes.
I know you were talking about getting off the equilibrium, losing cool, and in situations where you're dealing with someone else, that when you lose your cool and you call them to apologize, how do you go about fixing that situation if sometimes you have a person that's difficult to deal with or that won't accept the apology as they spend the
Okay, so the question for those who didn't hear it was that when you're faced with a situation, you've lost equilibrium, and you know you've lost equilibrium, and you call the other person back to apologize, as my example, and the other person doesn't reciprocate, then what do you do? So the thing is, and I'm going to be a little philosophical again, so bear with me. All of us are what I call a closed loop system, right? So I'm talking right now, and I'm saying the words that my brain is processing, and each one of you is also a closed loop system. So what you're hearing are my words, but each of you is having an internal conversation right now. Some of you are thinking of lunch. Some of you are thinking, man, this is boring stuff. Some are interested. Some are intrigued. That's normal. I accept that. I can see that in the faces around, who is in and who is out. It's perfectly fine. What I'm doing is doing my part to use language to try to create a certain response within the other person. But whether I can guarantee that the response is being triggered, I have no control over. So all I can do is be as dignified as I can. And in most cases, what I've observed is if it's a question of timing. There is a time to apologize also, right? So you don't apologize when the emotions are still churning. because the other person is not listening to you. So you have to find a time when the situation is right to also apologize. And that's also a skill that you have to learn. You don't apologize to somebody right after they've had their own bad event. They would not accept it. But if you apologize to somebody who is in a good mood, they will accept it. So it's also a question of when to apologize, not just the act of apologizing, so you can give yourself the best possible chance to get the other person's closed nervous system to accept the signals you're giving it. It's amazing if you all think about it. We are all so closed in our heads. We are constantly talking to ourselves. And we are constantly accepting or dismissing the inputs we are getting based on the realities we have. So you just accept it for being human. And there are times when I have called somebody and I've started my apology and the person hung up on me. It's fine, even before I finished. And I understand that. Then I call again at a better time. So there is no, being human is being flawed. And once you accept that, then you also accept the fact that they don't accept what you said. Did I answer your question? Cool.
Before we ask, so when you were 22, 23, did you have
No. Like I said, I was in that first phase. I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't have somebody telling me back then what I'm trying to tell you now. So now I'm in the phase of knowing what I don't know. That's phase 2. Maybe in 10 years, 15 years, I'll be in phase 3 where I kind of know what I'm talking about.
So I may argue with you.
Okay.
You might be in phase 4.
Nah. I don't.
Went over with him and we talked a little bit. He's actually, you continue to work the education bubble.
Yeah.
He's got a new job. He's promoted. Big job. And so my gut says you're probably 4. Maybe?
No, I'm studying because I know what I don't know. That's why I'm studying. If I... Nice try.
I tried. He's the speaker. He knows better.
Yeah.
This is a two-part question.
Okay.
At the beginning of the speech, you said that you managed people in 12 locations around the world, correct? How do you find yourself communicating with your team at those distance locations, and what's most effective? And the second part of that is, when you have to deliver news that should be delivered personally, such maybe bad news, how do you find the most effective way to communicate that bad news?
That's a good question. Let me do the second part first because it's easier. I spend a lot of my time on the road. On an average, I'm on the road 180, 200 days of the year. So I'm there in person, and if I have to give bad news, I try my level best to give bad news in person. It's too easy and I think cowardly to give bad news over an email or leave a voicemail to say, hey. So you talk to people in person. So I try and do that in person. And that's why the domain of family is so important, right? So my wife and kids, they don't see me much. But when they do see me, I'm very much focused on them. So in fact, right after this, I'm going to go straight. I'm going to take half a day off and go to the beach with the kids and my wife to spend the weekend there because I'm in town for a couple of days, and I'm going to spend the time with them. So that's important. You've got to do it in person. The first question in terms of communicating across a diverse group of locations and cultures, I don't have an easy answer because, as I said before, every human being is a closed-loop system. And even if you take different cultures like Chinese, Indian, German, American, Russian, British, and those are some of the areas that I mainly work with, they all have their cultural frameworks. So what I try and do a lot is use simple language when talking to those for whom English is not their first language. And try to keep, when I'm talking to a German or talking to a Chinese person, I have to accept that they might misinterpret what I say. So I ask, there's a lot of active listening and active conversation going on where I would stop and say, guys, are you with me? So there are a lot of skills that you would have to learn on how to communicate across cultures. And also how to communicate over the phone. It's a big challenge for us. We have many meetings where people misunderstand each other because you have 10 people dialing in from 5 different locations, all on a telecon, when to interrupt, when to interject. And these are all skills you have to learn and just keep educating yourself on. But for all of you, as you go into the workforce, I'm glad you brought this up, cross-cultural, non-visual communication is going to be probably the most important skill you're going to have to start educating yourself on. Because for many of you, your boss will be in a different time zone at the minimum, or a different country. Your team members are going to be in different countries. You might see them, if you're lucky, 3-4 times a year, and you still have to work together to produce product. So cross-cultural, non-visual communication is absolutely an area that you should all be looking at if you want to be a global leader. But I don't have an easy answer for you. I would just say that I accept it's a challenge, and I try to use simple language, and I try to ask questions during my discussion to make sure that I understand what they're saying. I repeat it, or I try to paraphrase what I heard, and I ask them to paraphrase what they heard. And that becomes a way to try to make sure that you're at least talking, if not on the same page, in the same book. You are the moderator, so.
Yeah, apparently I'm not doing well. Striped shirt?
Do you think it's sometimes necessary to throw, I guess, some of these things out to be a good leader? Like, I guess, to keep the equilibrium or to show that you're a good leader? To throw some of these, like, modules away for a time?
Sure, it's up to you. It's your choice. But what I can tell you is that these are fundamental domains, and you can only postpone them for a certain amount of time, because ultimately it will break down, and when it breaks down, you'll be in deep trouble. It's like maintaining your car. Yeah, sure, you can postpone an oil change for another 3,000 miles or not get a new tire, but when it breaks, it'll be tough. So I know it's overwhelming, right? But there are more than these. I just gave you 10 to feel a sense. But there are at least 10, if not more. And you have to learn over the course of a day how to manage these different things. It does not mean that you do every one of them every day. But you got to know that this is a domain that you have to pay attention to, because if you ignore it, it'll eventually break. That's what leads to many CEOs who are in jail now, or many CEOs or star performers who have had destructive marriages. They have lost identity in the world. Lance Armstrong, classic example. So yeah, you can postpone it, you can push it off, but just be aware that they will break if you don't take care of them, and when they break, you're in trouble. Now, once you know that, you're an adult, you have to figure out how to manage it. Yeah?
So how do you know when you've moved from conscious competence to conscious competence and not accidentally backtrack to unconscious competence?
You probably will go through that up and down. Others will. You will get. Now let me, without bragging. So don't get me wrong. I'm not being arrogant here. I have never applied for a job in my life. People have asked me to take jobs, right? And they have been giving me or asking me to take on jobs of more and more responsibility. So it's also, as I said before, leadership is what others assess you for. I can sit here and say I'm the greatest leader around, and I can look behind me and there is nobody. But to me, I'm the greatest leader. It's everybody else's fault, right? That's one view. The other view is saying that it'll be the behaviors and actions of others towards you that will show you where you are in that journey. So if my CEO of Siemens picked up the phone and said, hey, Vinod, I want you to be the CEO of Siemens, then maybe I'm on phase 4. But the fact that I'm not at that point tells me I'm not in phase 4. So it's really the feedback you get from others around you that define your state of maturity in leadership. And a lot of people are very self-centered. They think that they know it all. And that's the most dangerous place to be. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
With most, I guess, interns and new hires that are coming in today, what do you feel that most of them are lacking?
Just experience. I can tell you, I mean, and I don't remember whom I was talking to actually. If I had to reapply for a job with all of you around me, I probably wouldn't get the job. If I had known what you all know at this age when I was 20, 21 years old. So you're in good shape. You're all in good shape. I think you just got to come in hungry. You got to come in having no sense of entitlement, knowing that you're all starting, and it's a 40-year journey in front of you. That's a long journey. So year one is year one. So I think all of you are in general, very good shape. And I think that the average, when I look at resumes nowadays, people have gotten much better at taking on extracurricular activities, being involved in different kinds of organizations. So I see a lot of good stuff. So I think the number one thing that you're all lacking is experience, and that really comes from knowing that and that's why I talked about these 4 steps. Come in knowing that you are a novice. Accept that you're a novice, and know that you will only progress through learning and time. You cannot fast forward 10 years. You will go through 10 years. So accept that you're a novice, and it's a 40-year journey. And spend. When I compare American new engineers to Chinese or Indian or Russian, I think the one big difference I sometimes sense is entitlement. An Indian engineer or a Chinese engineer who gets paid 1/3 of what you will get paid, works twice the amount of hours you will work for the 1/3 pay, they are more hungry. So you just got to be aware of that. But in general, I would say you're all in good shape. Just accept that you'll be starting at 0.
You said when you were 20, you didn't have this model.
Yeah, I didn't have this model.
So my question is, how did you actually discover these domains? Did you have
Yeah.
have a leader? Did you have a mentor? Did you stumble? And maybe that's how you noticed that these were things that you needed to take care of that you postponed too long?
So Tim talked about the fact that I'm learning, I'm educating myself, right? So I have been. So if I assume that I finished my bachelor's in '96, I finished in '96. So for the last 17 years, I've always been educating myself, right? So I have a master's in engineering, I have an MBA, I have many management courses, I have Six Sigma certifications, I have taken other non-degree courses. I have about 20 different mentors from different walks of life. So this is an amalgamation of a lot of different things. And I forget who it was. Somebody said, like, a mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's open. So you got to keep an open mind and just keep exploring. There's a lot of wisdom out there, but you have to go ask for people to teach you. And in order for people to teach you, you have to be humble, to know that you don't know enough. And then it just comes, and then you reflect. You have to sit and think about, what is it that I learned today? And make notes. And I see many of you taking notes. It's a great habit. Keep that going. Because that's when you start reflecting and learn from the reflection. Yeah? But I'm sure if you talk to me 10 years from now, I might have a different view on life, and that's the way it is. Yeah?
How do you deal with other leaders that may
not have this same model. For example, you have leaders around you probably,
Yeah.
and when they don't have this certain,
I accept it. They're human. I'm sure they have their own journeys that they're on. And, I think one fundamental principle I live by, at least in corporate America or in a company like Siemens, is 99% of the people come to work with the intent of doing the right thing. And all of them are at work to take care of their concerns. And all of them, at least to my knowledge, are human. So once you accept those three things, you don't take it personal. You accept people for their flaws, and you still try to find a way. So I have my flaws, you will have your flaws, but we also have strengths. And you try to leverage the strength of every leader. And you work from the strengths of others. You put them in positions where they can use their strengths to succeed, rather than having to minimize their weaknesses to succeed. And like I said, there are very few people who I think are at that other extreme of this continuum of learning and leadership. So therefore, 99% of leaders and managers are all like me. We are good in some ways, bad in some ways. And the other thing I do is, if there is somebody who really turns me off, right, with their arrogance or with their ignorance, I just ignore them. I don't lose my cool about them. I deal with it, and then I politely move on to somebody else. Getting emotionally coupled to ignorant, arrogant people is my problem, not their problem.
So Vinod, in addition to the model, what I heard, and maybe need to remember myself, we're all human, we're flawed. Humility is a good thing, and leadership starts with myself.
Yep.
Right? And so what I want to thank you for is your spirituality, thinking bigger than Vinod, because I know UCF is better, I know Eli Squared is better, I know the students are better, I know I am better, because you chose to come invite us onto your journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.